Before we embark on this chilling journey into one of history's most catastrophic climate disasters, make sure to subscribe to experience more incredible historical adventures. Are you prepared to feel the bone-deep cold of a summer that never came? Let's discover what it truly meant to survive the year without summer. Day 1, June 15th, 1815, the impossible cold. You wake to the sound of wind howling against wooden shutters, and your first conscious thought is confusion. The air in a room is so cold you can see your breath forming small clouds in the dim light. This can't be right. Your body tells you it should be summer. There's sunlight filtering through the gaps in the shutters, but the temperature feels like the depths of winter. You pull the rough woolen blankets tighter around yourself, but they offer little comfort. The cold seems to seep through everything: the thin mattress, the wooden floor, even the walls themselves. Your feet, when they touch the floor, recoil from what's so cold it might as well be stone. The room around you is small and simple, with whitewashed walls and heavy wooden beams overhead. A single window, covered by thick shutters, provides the only natural light. There's a wash basin on a simple table, but when you approach it, you discover that a thin layer of ice has formed on the water's surface overnight. Ice. In June, you dress quickly in the clothes laid out on a wooden chair: thick wool trousers, a heavy cotton shirt, a wool vest, and a coat that feels more appropriate for winter than summer. Even fully dressed, the cold penetrates everything. Your fingers are stiff and clumsy as you try to fasten buttons and ties. When you push open the shutters, the sight that greets you defies all logic and expectation. Snow is falling. Not the light, brief shower of an unusual weather pattern, but heavy, persistent snow that's already accumulating on the ground. The landscape beyond the window looks like the middle of winter, despite the calendar insisting it's mid-June. The sky overhead is a sickly gray-brown color, unlike any sky you've ever seen. It hangs low and oppressive, blocking out what should be bright summer sunlight. The air itself seems thick and heavy, with an acrid smell that makes your nose and throat burn slightly when you breathe. You make your way downstairs, following the smell of wood smoke and what might be cooking food. The house is dark despite the daylight hours, lit only by candles and oil lamps. Every window is shuttered against the cold, and you can hear the wind whistling through gaps in the walls. The kitchen is warmer than the rest of the house, thanks to a large fireplace where logs burn constantly. Even so, everyone gathered around the rough wooden table is bundled in multiple layers of clothing. The woman tending the fire wears a heavy shawl over her dress, and the man reading a newspaper near the hearth has his coat buttoned to his chin. The food placed before you is simple and sparse: thin porridge, a small piece of bread that's hard and dark, and watery milk that tastes slightly sour. The portions are smaller than what you'd expect, and you notice how carefully everyone eats, as if food is precious and not to be wasted. The newspaper the man is reading catches your attention. The headlines speak of extraordinary weather and unusual atmospheric conditions affecting much of Europe and America. Reports of crop failures, livestock deaths, and widespread suffering from the cold. But there's no explanation for what's causing this climatic catastrophe. After the meager breakfast, you venture outside to experience the full impact of this impossible summer. The snow crunches under your feet, already several inches deep and still falling steadily. The cold is immediate and penetrating, cutting through your heavy clothes as if they were made of paper. The landscape around you is devastating to witness. What should be lush summer fields are covered in snow and ice. Plants that should be green and thriving are blackened and dead, killed by repeated frosts. Trees that should be full of leaves stand mostly bare, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers into the gray sky. You walk through what appears to be a farming village, and the impact of this climate disaster becomes clear. Gardens that should be producing vegetables for summer meals are destroyed. Grain fields that should be growing tall and green are stunted, brown, and dying. Livestock huddle together in whatever shelter they can find, their breath visible in the frigid air. The people you encounter move quickly from building to building, hunched against the cold and wind. Everyone is bundled in winter, clothing despite the summer calendar. Their faces are drawn and worried, and you catch fragments of conversation about failed crops, dying animals, and dwindling food supplies. In the village center, groups of men gather around a small fire, their voices low and concerned. They speak of friends and relatives in other towns who are facing starvation, of entire communities abandoning their homes to search for food and warmth elsewhere. The normal rhythms of summer life, farming, trade, travel, have been completely disrupted by this climatic catastrophe. You notice the absence of normal summer sounds. No insects buzzing, no birds singing, no rustle of leaves in a warm breeze. Instead, there's only the howl of cold wind, the creak of bare tree branches, and the constant whisper of falling snow. The local church bells ring the hour, and you're surprised to realize it's only mid-afternoon. The sky is so dark and overcast that it feels like evening. The brown-gray clouds seem to press down on the earth, creating a sense of claustrophobia and oppression that adds to the physical discomfort of the cold. As you make your way back toward the house where you woke, you pass a group of women trying to salvage what they can from their ruined gardens. They work with bare hands despite the cold, picking through frost-killed plants to find anything edible. Their efforts yield pitifully little. A few small potatoes, some withered vegetables, scraps that would normally be considered unfit for consumption. The economic impact of this climate disaster is becoming clear. Food prices, you overhear, have increased dramatically. Many families are already rationing their meals, not knowing when conditions might improve or if the situation will get worse. Some are burning furniture and fence posts to stay warm, having already exhausted their winter with supplies. That evening, gathered around the fire with the family in whose house you found yourself, you listen to stories of the growing crisis. Refugees are streaming through the village. Families who've abandoned their farms and homes in search of food and warmth. Some are heading south, hoping for better weather, while others travel towards cities where they might find work or charity. The fire in the hearth burns constantly, consuming wood at an alarming rate. You help gather fallen branches and whatever other fuel can be found, but it's clear that maintaining warmth through an entire summer of winter weather will quickly exhaust available resources. As night falls, early, because of the perpetual cloud cover, the temperature drops even further. Inside the house, despite the fire, your breath is visible. The water in the wash basin freezes solid. You pile on every available blanket and still shiver through the night, unable to imagine how people without adequate shelter or fuel are surviving. The wind continues to howl outside, rattling the shutters and finding every gap in the walls. Snow continues to fall, accumulating to depths that would be remarkable in January, let alone June. The whole world seems to have been plunged into an endless winter from which there may be no escape. Day 2, June 16th, 1815, the spreading crisis. You wake to discover that the temperature has dropped even further overnight. The fire in the main room has burned low, and everyone in the house is huddled under every available covering. The woman of the house moves slowly, her joints stiff with cold, to rebuild the fire with precious fuel. Outside, the snow has continued falling through the night. What was already an impossible accumulation for June has now deepened to more than a foot. The weight of snow is breaking tree branches, and you can hear the sharp crack of wood splitting under the unusual burden. Breakfast is even more meager than yesterday, watery porridge with no milk, and bread so hard it has to be soaked in hot water before it can be eaten. The family eats in silence, their faces grave with worry that extends far beyond simple discomfort. After the meal, you venture outside to help with the increasingly desperate work of survival. The first task is gathering fuel for the fires that are the only things standing between the household and hypothermia. You join the search for anything that will burn, fallen branches, old fence posts, even furniture that might be spared. The work is exhausting in the extreme cold. Your hands become numb within minutes despite heavy gloves, and your feet lose feeling inside thick boots. Every breath of the bitter air burns your lungs, and the constant effort of moving through deep snow quickly drains your energy. As you work, you encounter neighbors engaged in the same desperate struggle. One family has already burned their wooden chairs and is eyeing their table with obvious reluctance. Another has started dismantling an unused outbuilding, board by board, to feed their fire. The village presents a scene of escalating crisis. The baker's shop is closed, there's no grain to make bread, and what little flour remains is being saved for emergency rations. The miller's will sits idle because the crops that should be feeding it are dead in the fields. Even the livestock are suffering terribly, with many animals already dead from exposure and others clearly dying. You help a neighbor attempt to save his small flock of chickens by moving them into his kitchen. The birds are listless and cold, their feathers ruffled against the temperature. Many have already stopped laying eggs, and several have died overnight despite being sheltered in what should have been adequate coops. The human toll is becoming evident as well. An elderly man in the village has developed a persistent cough that worsens daily. A young mother struggles to keep her infant warm and fed when her own nutrition is insufficient for nursing. Children who should be playing outside in summer sunshine instead huddle indoors, pale and quiet. Word arrives during the day of conditions in other regions. A traveler passing through brings news that the situation is widespread. Cities reporting food riots, entire regions facing famine, governments struggling to respond to a crisis unlike anything in recorded history. Paris, he says, has seen snow in June for the first time in living memory. The afternoon brings a new horror, the discovery that several people in nearby villages have already died from the cold and hunger. Families who ran out of fuel for heating, elderly people whose bodies couldn't withstand the constant cold, children weakened by malnutrition and exposure. The death toll from this climatic disaster is already mounting. You spend hours helping to care for the livestock, but it's increasingly clear that many animals won't survive. Horses and cattle stand motionless in whatever shelter can be provided, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Some have already succumbed, their bodies frozen solid in postures of misery. The psychological impact of the crisis is as devastating as the physical hardships. People move through their daily tasks with the mechanical efficiency of those who dare not think too deeply about their situation. Conversations are brief and focused on immediate survival needs: fuel, food, shelter. The normal social rhythms of village life have been completely disrupted. Evening brings no relief from the cold, and the snowfall continues unabated. The accumulated snow is now deep enough to make travel difficult, cutting off easy communication between villages and making it harder for communities to help each other or share resources. The family with whom you're staying makes the difficult decision to slaughter one of their chickens for dinner, a decision driven by the calculation that the bird probably won't survive anyway, and the protein is desperately needed. The meal, while more substantial than recent fare, is eaten with the knowledge that each such decision brings the household closer to having no resources left at all. As you sit by the fire that night, listening to the wind howl and the snow pile up against the shutters, the magnitude of the crisis becomes clear. This isn't a brief, unusual weather pattern that will pass in a few days. This is a fundamental disruption of the climate that could last for months, destroying entire growing seasons and plunging whole regions into famine. The fire burns lower despite constant feeding, and you realize that even this most basic necessity, warmth, is becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The wood supply that would normally last a household through an entire winter is being consumed in just days of this impossible summer weather. Day 3, June 17th, 1815, Exodus and Desperation. You wake to find that the fire has died completely during the night, and the inside of the house is now barely warmer than the outside. Ice has formed on the inside of the windows, and the water in the kitchen buckets is frozen solid. The cold is so intense it feels like a physical weight pressing down on everything. The family moves with increasing desperation to restart the fire, breaking up pieces of furniture for fuel when the wood supply proves insufficient. A beautiful wooden chair, clearly a treasured possession, is chopped up and fed to the flames without ceremony. Survival has reduced all decisions to the most basic calculations. Outside, the scene has become even more devastating. The snow has drifted against buildings in some places to heights of several feet. Many houses in the village show no signs of smoke from their chimneys, suggesting that their occupants have either fled or worse. The normal sounds of a living community, children playing, animals making noise, people going about their daily work, have been replaced by an eerie silence broken only by wind and the occasional crack of breaking wood. The first refugees begin passing through the village in the morning. Families with whatever possessions they can carry, fleeing their homes in search of food and warmth elsewhere. They move slowly through the deep snow, the children crying from cold and hunger, the adults grim-faced with determination born of desperation. You help provide what little assistance can be spared, a cup of hot water, a few minutes by the fire, directions to the next village. But the resources to help are so limited that each act of charity threatens the survival of those providing it. The moral calculations are brutal and immediate. One refugee family tells of villages to the north where every crop has failed completely, where people are subsisting on tree bark and grass, where entire communities have been abandoned as residents flee seeking food. Another speaks of cities where food prices have increased tenfold, where riots have broken out as hungry people fight over dwindling supplies. The local authorities, what little government exists at the village level, are completely overwhelmed. There are no resources to distribute, no emergency supplies to draw upon, no effective way to coordinate relief efforts. Each community is left to fend for itself in the face of a disaster beyond any previous experience. You join a group of villagers attempting to salvage what they can from the ruined fields. The work is heartbreaking, digging through snow and ice to find vegetables that might still be edible, cutting down grain that never had a chance to mature, gathering anything organic that might serve as fodder for the surviving livestock. The harvest is pitifully small. Potatoes no larger than marbles, grain stalks with barely formed kernels, vegetables rotted by repeated freezing and thawing. What would normally feed a village for months might now last only days, and that's if it's rationed carefully. During the afternoon, news arrives that makes the situation even more dire. A messenger reports that similar conditions are affecting vast areas of Europe and North America. This isn't a localized weather disturbance, but a global phenomenon. Crops are failing everywhere. Famine is spreading across continents, and governments are struggling to maintain order as their populations face starvation. The psychological impact of this news is devastating. The hope that conditions might be better elsewhere, that relief might come from neighboring regions, is crushed. Every community is facing the same crisis, meaning that no outside help is coming. Each village, each family is truly on its own. You spend the evening helping to care for a child who has fallen ill, whether from the cold, from malnutrition, or from disease brought on by the harsh conditions isn't clear. The family has no medicine beyond basic herbs, no way to provide the warmth and nutrition that might help the child recover. The helplessness is complete and heartbreaking. More families pass through during the night, seeking shelter from the continuing snowfall. The house where you're staying takes in as many as can fit, but this means sharing already inadequate food and fuel among more people. The fire burns lower, the food portions become smaller, and everyone shivers through the night despite being packed together for warmth. The conversations you overhear paint a picture of civilization under unprecedented stress. Reports of governments falling as they prove unable to feed their populations, of armies deserting as soldiers choose to try to save their own families rather than serve states that can't provide for them, of entire regions descending into lawlessness as social structures collapse under the pressure of survival. The snow continues to fall as you drift into an exhausted, cold sleep. The accumulation is now so deep that travel is becoming nearly impossible, trapping each community in isolation just when cooperation and mutual aid are most desperately needed. Halfway through this harrowing journey, what strikes you most about trying to survive when nature itself turns against humanity? Can you imagine enduring months of winter weather during what should be summer? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you think you'd cope with such an impossible situation. Day 4, June 18th, 1815, the breaking point. You wake to discover that several of the refugees who sheltered in the house overnight haven't survived the cold. An elderly man and a young child have died quietly in their sleep, their bodies growing cold and stiff while others slept fitfully around them. The family that took them in now faces the grim task of dealing with the dead when the ground is frozen too hard for burial. The psychological impact of death, so close and immediate, is crushing. These aren't distant casualties read about in newspapers, but people you shared warmth and food with just hours before. The reality that this climate disaster is killing people directly, not just threatening future harvests, makes the crisis feel even more desperate and immediate. Breakfast consists of melted snow flavored with a few grains of barley and scraps of vegetables salvaged from ruined gardens. The portions are so small they barely qualify as food, and everyone eats in silence, conserving energy for the increasingly difficult work of survival. The fuel situation has become critical. The last of the furniture has been burned, and now people are pulling board from walls and floors to feed the fires. The structural integrity of buildings is being sacrificed for the immediate need for warmth, a choice that will have consequences if anyone survives long enough to face them. You join a group of villagers in a desperate expedition to the nearby forest to gather whatever wood can be found. The work is exhausting, wading through snow that's now waist-deep in some places, breaking dead branches with numb fingers, dragging the precious fuel back to the village through drifts that seem designed to trap and exhaust anyone trying to move through them. In the forest, you discover that you're not the only one seeking fuel. Trees have been stripped of every accessible branch, and some desperate people have begun cutting down living trees with whatever tools they can find. The normal rules about property and conservation have been abandoned in favor of the immediate need to stay alive. The expedition yields less fuel than the energy expended to gather it, a calculation that speaks to the impossible mathematics of survival in these conditions. Every action requires energy that can't be replaced. Every decision involves trade-offs between immediate needs and long-term survival prospects. Back in the village, the news is uniformly grim. More houses stand empty as their occupants either flee or succumb to the cold. The few shops that remain open have nothing to sell, their supplies exhausted, and no prospect of resupply in a world where transportation has become nearly impossible and production has ceased. A group of young men announces their intention to leave the village and try to reach larger towns where there might be work or charity available. Their families face the agonizing choice between staying together and facing probable death, or separating in the hope that some might survive. The decisions being forced on people are cruel beyond imagination. You spend the afternoon helping to prepare one family for their departure. They can carry very little, some clothes, a small amount of food, basic tools. Everything else that represents their life's work and memories must be abandoned. The weight of possessions against the weight of survival makes the choice inevitable, but no less heartbreaking. The weather shows no signs of improvement. If anything, the cold seems to be intensifying, and the snow continues to fall steadily. The accumulation is now so deep that the shapes of familiar buildings and landmarks are becoming obscured. The village is being buried under an impossible summer blizzard. During the day, you encounter a traveling scholar who claims to have knowledge of similar events in distant history. He speaks of years when volcanic eruptions have affected weather patterns, of ancient records describing summers that failed to arrive. His explanations offer little comfort. If this is a natural phenomenon that's occurred before, it could last for months or even years. The social fabric of the community continues to deteriorate under the pressure of survival. Arguments break out over the distribution of scarce resources, families split apart under the stress of impossible choices, and the normal courtesies and cooperation that make community life possible begin to fray. Yet there are also moments of extraordinary human kindness and solidarity. A family with slightly more food sharing with neighbors who have none. People taking turns tending fires through the night so others can sleep. Strangers offering what comfort they can to those who've lost family members. As evening approaches, the reality of the situation becomes clear. The village as a functioning community is dying. Most families are preparing to leave, seeking survival elsewhere, even though there's no reason to believe conditions are better anywhere else. The choice is between certain death by staying and possible death by leaving. You help pack what few belongings can be carried and prepare for the morning departure. The house that sheltered you is being abandoned, left to whatever fate awaits. Empty buildings in a world where the basic rules of survival have been rewritten by climate catastrophe. That night, as the fire burns low despite being fed with the last combustible materials in the house, you realize you're witnessing the collapse of a way of life that has existed for centuries. Rural communities, stable family structures, agricultural cycles, seasonal rhythms, all are being destroyed by forces completely beyond human control. Day 5, June 19th, 1815, The Long Road. You wake before dawn to begin the exodus from the dying village. Around you, other families are making the same desperate preparations, bundling what few possessions they can carry, saying goodbye to homes and communities that may never recover from this climate catastrophe. The snow is still falling as you join the stream of refugees heading south, hoping against hope that conditions might be better in distant regions. The road is barely passable, buried under snow that makes every step an effort. Progress is measured in yards rather than miles, and the energy cost of travel quickly becomes apparent. The refugee column stretches as far as you can see in both directions. Families with children, elderly people struggling to keep up, individuals who've lost everything seeking shelter and survival, wherever it might be found. The normal social structures that organize and support such movements simply don't exist in a world where every community is facing the same crisis. Children who should be playing in summer sunshine instead trudge through snow that reaches above their knees, their faces blue with cold despite every piece of clothing their families own. Many are carried by adults who can barely manage the effort, but leaving the children behind isn't an option any parent can contemplate. The livestock that have survived this long are being driven along with the human refugees. Horses, cattle, goats, and chickens that represent the only remaining wealth of families who've lost everything else. But the animals are weakening rapidly, and you witness the heartbreaking decisions as families are forced to abandon creatures they can no longer keep alive. By midday, you've traveled perhaps 3 miles, a distance that would normally take less than an hour, but now represents hours of exhausting effort. Rest stops are brief and offer little relief. There's no fuel for fires, no shelter from the wind, and precious little food to restore energy for the continued journey. The landscape through which you're traveling tells the story of the disaster's scope. Every farm shows the same devastation: crops destroyed, animals dead, buildings abandoned. There's no evidence that conditions are better anywhere, no sign that the refugees are traveling toward relief rather than simply postponing the inevitable. You encounter other refugee columns coming from different directions, all carrying the same stories of crop failure, community collapse, and desperate flight from conditions that make survival impossible. The roads are becoming clogged with people who have nowhere to go but can't stay where they are. As the day progresses, the weaker members of the refugee column begin to fall behind. Elderly people whose bodies can't sustain the effort, children too small to keep up, individuals weakened by hunger and cold beyond their ability to continue. The choices facing their families are brutal: stay with them and risk everyone's survival, or continue and hope for rescue that probably won't come. The evening halt brings no real relief. Without fuel for fires, the refugees huddle together for warmth that proves inadequate against the continuing cold. Food, what little anyone still has, is shared sparingly. Many people simply don't eat, saving their few remaining supplies for their children or hoping to last another day until something changes. During the night, you're awakened by the sounds of grief. families discovering that elderly relatives or young children haven't survived the combination of exhaustion, cold, and malnutrition. Bodies are left beside the road, marked with whatever identification families can provide, in the hope that someone might eventually give them proper burial. The social bonds that normally organize and support communities are being tested beyond their limits. Arguments break out over the pace of travel, the sharing of resources, decisions about when to rest and when to continue. The stress of survival is stripping away the civilities that make cooperation possible. Yet there are also moments of extraordinary human solidarity. Strangers sharing food with children who aren't their own, stronger individuals helping to carry the possessions of those who've reached the limits of their endurance. People offering comfort and hope when there's little rational basis for either. As you drift into an exhausted sleep, pressed against others for warmth that still isn't enough to stop the shivering, you understand that you're witnessing one of history's great unrecorded disasters. The year without summer isn't just a meteorological curiosity or an interesting footnote in climate history. It's a human catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. The snow continues to fall through the night, covering the refugees in a white shroud that makes the column look like a military cemetery rather than a group of living people seeking survival. The cold penetrates everything, making sleep nearly impossible and sapping the strength needed for another day of impossible travel. June 20th, 1815. You wake to the grim realization that fewer people survived the night than began it. The refugee column has been reduced by death, by individuals who've wandered off in delirium, and by families who've simply stopped moving and wait for whatever end might come. The arithmetic of survival has become brutally simple. As the morning progresses and the column attempts to resume its desperate journey, you begin to understand the full scope of what you've witnessed. This isn't just local hardship or regional disaster. This is a global climate catastrophe that's reshaping human civilization in real time. The volcanic eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia, half a world away, has injected so much ash and sulfur into the atmosphere that it's blocking sunlight and triggering the worst climate disaster in recorded history. The effects will last for years, causing crop failures, famine, disease, and social upheaval across continents. You've experienced firsthand what it means when the fundamental assumptions of agricultural society, that summers will be warm, that crops will grow, that stored food will last until the next harvest, are suddenly and completely invalidated. The social structures, economic systems, and survival strategies that humanity has developed over millennia prove inadequate when nature itself turns hostile. The refugees around you represent millions of people worldwide who are facing the same impossible choices, the same desperate migrations, the same brutal calculations of survival. The year without summer will kill hundreds of thousands, displace millions more, and leave scars on human civilization that will last for generations. But you've also witnessed the extraordinary resilience and solidarity that humans can display in the face of catastrophe. The sharing of inadequate resources, the care for strangers' children, the willingness to continue hoping and struggling when all rational calculations suggest surrender. These represent the best of human nature tested under the worst possible conditions. The refugees continue their southward journey as you contemplate the larger lessons of this experience. Climate change isn't an abstract future threat. It's a force that can destroy civilization in a matter of months. The interconnectedness of human society means that disasters in one part of the world can have consequences everywhere. And the difference between survival and death often comes down to community solidarity and the willingness to help others even when resources are desperately scarce. As the snow continues to fall on what should be a warm June day, you understand that you've lived through one of history's defining moments, a time when the Earth itself reminded humanity how fragile and dependent we are on forces completely beyond our control. The lesson of 1815 isn't just about volcanic eruptions or historical climate events. It's about the speed with which stable societies can collapse when their fundamental assumptions prove wrong, and about the incredible human capacity for both cruelty and kindness when survival itself is at stake. If this journey through humanity's brush with climate catastrophe has moved you, please subscribe for more immersive historical experiences that show how our ancestors survived impossible challenges. What other natural disasters would you want to experience firsthand? The 1906 San Francisco earthquake? The 1918 Spanish flu pandemic? The Galveston hurricane of 1900? Share your ideas in the comments below. I'd love to hear which historical catastrophes you'd want to witness through the eyes of someone who lived through them. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next journey into history's most challenging moments.